A word processor is an electric or electronic device, or computer software application, that, as directed by the user, performs word processing, the composition, editing, formatting, and sometimes printing of any sort of written material. Word processing can also refer to advanced shorthand techniques, sometimes used in specialized contexts with a specially modified typewriter. The term was coined at IBM's Böblingen, West Germany laboratory in the 1960s. Typical features of a word processor include font application, spell checking, grammar checking, a built-in thesaurus, automatic text correction, web integration and HTML exporting, among others. In its simplest form, a word processor is little more than a large expensive typewriter that makes correcting mistakes easy. The word processor emerged as a standalone office machine in the 1960s, combining the keyboard text entry and printing functions of an electric typewriter with a tape recording unit and a bank of relays to perform basic formatting. Soon the word processor had a dedicated computer processor for the editing of text. Although features and designs varied among manufacturers and models, and new features were added as technology advanced, word processors typically featured a monochrome display and the ability to save documents on memory cards or diskettes. Later models introduced innovations such as spell-checking programs, improved formatting options, and dot matrix printing. As the more versatile combination of personal computers and printers became commonplace, and computer software applications for word processing became popular, most business machine companies stopped manufacturing word processor machines. As of 2009 there were only two U.S. companies, Classic and Alpha Smart, which still made them. Many older machines, however, remain in use. Since 2009, Sentinel has offered a machine described as a word processor, but it is more accurately a highly specialized microcomputer used for accounting and publishing. Word processors are descended from the Friedenflugschau writer, which had two punch tape stations and permitted switching from one to the other. It did not justify text, which was begun by IBM's magnetic tapes electric typewriter. Word processing was one of the earliest applications for the personal computer in office productivity. Although the early word processors evolved to use tag-based markup for document formatting, most modern word processors take advantage of a graphical user interface providing some form of what you see is what you get editing. Most are powerful systems consisting of one or more programs that can produce any arbitrary combination of images, graphics and text, the latter handled with typesetting capability. Microsoft Word is the most widely used word processing software according to a user tracking system built into the software, which is not built into LibreOffice, ABI Word, Quad, and LeX. Microsoft estimates that roughly 500 million people use the Microsoft Office suite, which includes Word. Many other word processing applications exist, including WordPerfect is favored for legal applications, and open-source applications OpenOffice.org Writer, LibreOffice Writer, ABI Word, Quad, and LeX. Web-based word processors, such as Office Web Apps or Google Docs, are a relatively new category. Characteristics: word processing typically implies the presence of text manipulation functions that extend beyond a basic ability to enter and change text, such as automatic generation of, batch mailings using form letter template and an address database. Indices of keywords and their page numbers. Tables of contents with section titles and their page numbers. Tables of figures with caption titles and their page numbers. Cross-referencing with section or page numbers. Footnote numbering. New versions of a document using variables. Other word processing functions include spell checking, autocorrection, grammar checking, a thesaurus function, collaborative editing, comments and annotations, and support for images and diagrams. Text editors were the precursors of word processors. While offering facilities for composing and editing text, they do not format documents. This can be done by batch document processing systems, starting with TJ2 and run often still available in such systems as LaTeX. Text editors are now used mainly by programmers, website designers, computer system administrators, and, in the case of LaTeX by mathematicians and scientists. They are also useful when fast startup times, small file sizes, editing speed and simplicity of operation are preferred over formatting. Due to their use in managing sometimes complex software projects, text editors can provide better facilities for managing large writing projects than a word processor. Later desktop publishing programs were specifically designed to allow elaborate layout for publication, but often offered only limited support for editing. Typically, desktop publishing programs allow users to import text that was written using a text editor or word processor. Almost all word processors enable users to employ styles, which are used to automate consistent formatting of text body, titles, subtitles, highlighted text, and so on. Styles greatly simplify managing the formatting of large documents, since changing a style automatically changes all text that the style has been applied to. Even in shorter document styles can save a lot of time while formatting. However, most help files refer to styles as an advanced feature of the word processor, which often discourages users from using styles regularly. Document statistics. Most current word processors can calculate various statistics pertaining to a document. These usually include character count, word count, sentence count, line count, paragraph count, page count. Word, sentence and paragraph length. Editing time. Errors are common. For instance, a dash surrounded by spaces like either of these may be counted as a word. Typical usage. Word processors have a variety of uses and applications within the business world, home, education, journalism, publishing, and the literary arts. Business. Within the business world, word processors are extremely useful tools. Typical uses include legal copies, letters and letterhead, memos, reference documents. Business tend to have their own format and style for any of these. Thus, versatile word processors with layout editing and similar capabilities find widespread use in most business. Home. While many homes have word processors on their computers, word processing in the home tends to be educational, planning or business related, dealing with school assignments or work being completed at home. Occasionally word processors are used for recreational purposes, for example writing short stories or personal correspondence. Some use word processors to create raw copyright SUMA copyright and greeting cards, but many of these home publishing processes have been taken over by desktop publishing programs specifically oriented toward home users. The rise of email and social networks has also reduced the home role of the word processor, as users that formerly required printed output can now be done entirely online. Literature. Novelists, poets, playwrights, screenwriters, and essayists naturally gravitated toward word processing once the technology became widely available. Notable early adopters in the mid-late 1970s included science fiction author Jerry Pournelle, Larry Niven, Stanley Elkin, James Fallows, and Michael Crichton. However, the first novel generally credited as having been written on a word processor is Len Deighton's Bomber, which was composed on an IBM Mount Street in London in 1968 September. Deighton's typist and assistant, Ms. Eleanor Handley, was the person to actually operate the machine. Some writers such as Cory Doctorow and Neil Stephenson prefer text editors to word processors. History. IBM Selectric. The term word processing was invented by IBM in the late 1960s. In 1969, two software-based text editing products were developed and marketed by Information Control Systems. Both products used the Digital Equipment Corporation PDP-8 minicomputer, D-tape randomly accessible tape drives, and a modified version of the IBM Selectric typewriter. These 1969 products preceded CRT display-based word processors. Text editing was done using a line numbering system viewed on a paper copy inserted in the Selectric typewriter. By 1971, word processing was recognized by the New York Times as a buzzword. A 1974 Times article referred to the brave new world of word processing, or with P. That's International Business Machines Talk. IBM introduced with P about 5 years ago for its magnetic tape Selectric typewriter and other electronic razzle-dazzle. IBM defined the term in a broad and vague way as the combination of people, procedures, and equipment which transforms ideas into printed communications, and originally used it to include dictating machines and ordinary, manually operated selectric typewriters. By the early 70s, however, the term was generally understood to mean semi-automated typewriters affording at least some form of electronic editing and correction, and the ability to produce perfect originals. Thus, the Times headlined a 1974 Xerox product as a speedier electronic typewriter, but went on to describe the product, which had no screen, as a word processor rather than strictly a typewriter, in that it stores copy on magnetic tape or magnetic cards for retyping, corrections, and subsequent printout. Mainframe systems. In the late 1960s, IBM provided a program called Format for generating printed documents on any computer capable of running Fortran 4. Written by Gerald M. Burns, Format was described in his paper Description of Format, a text processing program, as a production program which facilitates the editing and printing of finished documents directly on the printer of a relatively small computer system. It features good performance, totally free-form input, very flexible formatting capabilities including up to 8 columns per page, automatic capitalization, aids for index construction, and a minimum of non-text, control elements items. Input was normally on punched cards or magnetic tape, with up to 80 capital letters and non-alphabetic characters per card. The limited typographical controls available were implemented by control sequences. For example, letters were automatically converted to lowercase unless they followed a full stop. Output could be printed on a typical line printer in all capitals €, or in upper and lowercase using a special printer chain €, or could be punched as a paper tape which could be printed, in better than line printer quality, on a shorthand. A worker-like program with some improvements, Doormat, was developed and used at University College London. Electromechanical paper tape-based equipment such as the Friden shorthand had long been available. The shorthand allowed for operations such as repetitive typing of form letters, and when equipped with an auxiliary reader, could perform an early version of mail merge. Circa 1970 it began to be feasible to apply electronic computers to office automation tasks. IBM's Mag-Tape Selectric typewriter and later Mag-Card Selectric were early devices of this kind, which allowed editing, simple revision, and repetitive typing, with a one-line display for editing single lines. The first novel to be written on a word processor, the IBM Mount Street, was Len Dayton's Bomber, published in 1970. Impact on office administration. The New York Times, reporting on a 1971 business equipment trade show, said, "The buzzword for this year's show was word processing, or the use of electronic equipment, such as typewriters, procedures and trained personnel to maximize office efficiency." At the IBM exhibition, a girl typed on an electronic typewriter. The copy was received on a magnetic tape cassette which accepted corrections, deletions, and additions and then produced a perfect letter for the boss's signature. In 1971, a third of all working women in the United States were secretaries, and they could see that word processing would have an impact on their careers. Some manufacturers, according to a Times article, urged that the concept of word processing could be the answer to women's lib advocates' prayers. Word processing will replace the traditional secretary and give women new administrative roles in business and industry. The 1970s word processing concept did not refer merely to equipment, but, explicitly, to the use of equipment for breaking down secretarial labor into distinct components, with some staff members handling typing exclusively while others supply administrative support. A typical operation would leave most executives without private secretaries. Instead, one secretary would perform various administrative tasks for 3 or more secretaries. A 1971 article said that some secretaries see with P as a career ladder into management. Others see it as a dead end into the automated ghetto. Others predict it will lead straight to the picket line. The National Secretaries Association, which defined secretaries as people who can assume responsibility without direct supervision, feared that with P would transform secretaries into space-age typing pools. The article considered only the organizational changes resulting from secretaries operating word processors rather than typewriters. The possibility that word processors might result in managers creating documents without the intervention of secretaries was not considered not surprising in an era when few but secretaries possessed keyboarding skills. Dedicated models. In 1972, Stephen Bernard Dorsey, founder and president of Canadian company Automatic Electronic Systems, introduced the world unregistered trademark's first programmable word processor with a video screen. The real breakthrough by Dorsey's unregistered trademark SAS team was that their machine stored the operator unregistered trademark's texts on magnetic disks. Texts could be retrieved from the disk simply by entering their names at the keyboard. It was actually a sophisticated microcomputer that could be reprogrammed by changing the instructions contained within a few chips. In 1975, Dorsey started Makan Data Systems and introduced the Makan 2000 word processor. The Makan 2000 improved on the AES design by using the Intel 8080 single-chip microprocessor, which made the word processor smaller, less costly to build and supported multiple languages. In addition, the competitive edge for the Makan 2000 was that, unlike many other machines, it was truly programmable. The Makan machine countered the problem of obsolescence by avoiding the limitations of a hardwired system of program storage. The Makan 2000 utilized RAM, which was mass-produced and totally programmable. The Makan 2000 was said to be a year ahead of its time when it was introduced into a marketplace that represented some pretty serious competition such as IBM, Xerox and Wang Laboratories. In 1978, Makan partnered with Dutch multinational Philips and Dorsey grew Makan's sales position to number 3 among major word processor manufacturers, behind only IBM and Wang. Software models. In the early 1970s, computer scientist Harold Koplow was hired by Wang Laboratories to program calculators. One of his programs permitted a Wang calculator to interface with an IBM Selectric typewriter, which was at the time used to calculate and print the paperwork for auto sales. In 1974, Koplow's interface program was developed into the Wang 1200 word processor, an IBM Selectric-based text storage device. The operator of this machine typed text on a conventional IBM Selectric. When the return key was pressed, the line of text was stored on a cassette tape. One cassette held roughly 20 pages of text, and could be played back by printing the contents on continuous form paper in the 1200 typewriter's print mode. The stored text could also be edited, using keys on a simple, 6-key array. Basic editing functions included insert, delete, skip, and so on. The labor and cost savings of this device were immediate, and remarkable. Pages of text no longer had to be retyped to correct simple errors, and projects could be worked on, stored, and then retrieved for use later on. The rudimentary Wang 1200 machine was the precursor of the Wang Office Information System, introduced in 1976. It was a true office machine, affordable by organizations such as medium-sized law firms, and easily learned and operated by secretarial staff. The Wang was not the first CRT-based machine, nor were all of its innovations unique to Wang. In the early 1970s, Linilex, Lexitron and Vidc introduced pioneering word processing systems with CRT display editing. A Canadian electronics company, Automatic Electronic Systems, had introduced a product in 1972, but went into receivership a year later. In 1976, refinanced by the Canada Development Corporation, it returned to operation as AES Data, and went on to successfully market its brand of word processors worldwide until its demise in the mid-1980s. Its first office product, the AES 90, combined for the first time a CRT screen, a floppy disk and a microprocessor, that is, the very same winning combination that would be used by IBM for its PC 7 years later. The AES 90 software was able to handle French and English typing from the start, displaying and printing the text side by side, a Canadian government requirement. The first 8 units were delivered to the office of the then Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, in February 1974. Despite these predecessors, Wang's product was a standout, and by 1978 it had sold more of these systems than any other vendor. The phrase word processor rapidly came to refer to CRT-based machines similar to the AES-90. Numerous machines of this kind emerged, typically marketed by traditional office equipment companies such as IBM, Linear, CPT, and NBI. All were specialized, dedicated, proprietary systems, with prices in the $10,000 ballpark. Cheap general-purpose computers were still the domain of hobbyists. Some of the earliest CRT-based machines used cassette tapes for removable memory storage until floppy diskettes became available for this purpose, first the 8-inch floppy, then the 5-1/4-inch. Printing of documents was initially accomplished using IBM's electric typewriters modified for ASCII character input. These were later replaced by application-specific daisy wheel printers, first developed by Diablo, which became a Xerox company, and later by Cume. For quicker draft printing, dot matrix line printers were optional alternatives with some word processors. WYSIWYG models, electric pencil, released in December 1976, was the first word processor software for microcomputers. Software-based word processors running on general-purpose personal computers gradually displaced dedicated word processors, and the term came to refer to software rather than hardware. Some programs were modeled after particular dedicated WP hardware. Multimate, for example, was written for an insurance company that had hundreds of typists using Wang systems, and spread from there to other Wang customers. To adapt to the smaller, more generic PC keyboard, Multimate used stick-on labels and a large plastic clip-on template to remind users of its dozens of Wang-like functions, using the Shift, Alt and Ctrl keys with the 10 IBM function keys and many of the alphabet keys. Other early word processing software required users to memorize semi-mnemonic key combinations rather than pressing keys labeled copy, or bold. However, the price differences between dedicated word processors and general-purpose PCs, and the value added to the latter by software such as VCCALC, was so compelling that personal computers and word processing software soon became serious competition for the dedicated machines. Word processing became the most popular use for personal computers, and unlike the spreadsheet and database markets, WordPerfect, XY Write, Microsoft Word, PFS, Write, and dozens of other word processing software brands competed in the 1980s. PC Magazine reviewed 57 different programs in one January 1986 issue. Development of higher resolution monitors allowed them to provide limited WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, to the extent that typographical features like bold and italics, indentation, justification and margins were approximated on screen. The mid to late 1980s saw the spread of laser printers, a typographic approach to word processing, and of true WYSIWYG bitmap displays with multiple fonts, PostScript, and graphical user interfaces. Standalone word processors adapted by getting smaller and replacing their CRTs with small character-oriented LCD displays. Some models also had computer-like features such as floppy disk drives and the ability to output to an external printer. They also got a name change, now being called electronic typewriters, and typically occupying a lower end of the market, selling for under $200 USD. During the late 1980s and into the 1990s the predominant word processing program was WordPerfect, MacWrite, Microsoft Word and other word processing programs for the bitmapped Apple Macintosh screen, introduced in 1984, were probably the first true WYSIWYG word processors to become known to many people until the introduction of Microsoft Windows. Dedicated word processors eventually became museum pieces. See also, Amstrad PCW, Authoring Systems, Canon CAT, Comparison of Word Processors, Content Management System, CPT Word Processors, Document Collaboration, List of Word Processors, IBM Mount St. Office Suite, TeX, Typography, MicroWriter, References. External links, FOSS Word Processors Compared, UWriter, ABI Word, and Called by Bruce Byfield, History of Word Processing, Remembering the Office of the Future, Word Processing and Office Automation Before the Personal Computer. A comprehensive history of early word processing concepts, hardware, software, and use. By Thomas Hay, IEEE Annals of the History of Computing 2846-31. A Brief History of Word Processing by Brian Kund, AES, a Canadian cautionary tale by CBC Television, www.vmaster.com. Technical Word Processing, Business Software Books. Us, a collection of word processor application books available for free download.